Thank you, Ron, for those inspiring words. As time is slipping by, let's move directly to the next inductee. The next inductee is Eugene Roark. You've already heard from his citation that he has done many, many things. I'm reminded again, if I haven't mentioned it, that in your packets there is a newsletter which has a larger biography of each of them as well as a news release. So you can, if you can't remember everything that everybody said, perhaps you can find some items there. Anyway, Eugene Roark has done so much with his life that we have only, I guess to remember last week, has done so much with his life, and we heard about that during the citations. We have two speakers who will fill in some of the details. We have Mary Jean Houston, who is the Wisconsin State Director for the Nature Conservancy. And we also have Nancy Bozak, who is the Executive Director for the Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association. This time I would like to invite Mary Jean forward. Before they get lost, there are some glasses up here. Was anybody needing those? One of our previous speakers.
Thank you, Joe, and thanks to the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame for this tremendous tradition to recognize our state's outstanding conservation leaders. And congratulations to the 3 inductees this year, and a special thanks to the family of Gene Roark, who traveled great distances to be here and help Gene celebrate, and to his friends and colleagues who are also here. Thank you so much for being here. So let's see, okay. So at the Nature Conservancy, when we learned back in December that Gene would be inducted into the Conservation Hall of Fame, a huge cheer went up throughout our 5 offices around the state. Gene is one of the 3 founders of the Nature Conservancy's program in Wisconsin, and he's a huge part of our success over the last 55 years. Back in 1959, Gene and his 2 co-founders, Dr. Joseph Hickey, who was inducted into the Hall of Fame years ago, and Dr. Hugh Iltis, were concerned that special places in nature were being lost in Wisconsin, and they felt that something should be done in our state before it was too late. As Gene once told me, we thought that if enough people of earnest goodwill got together, we could help save our lands and waters. So Gene was a busy graduate student at the time at the University of Wisconsin, and he was also a family man already. And he, in spite of that, he left Gene at home and hopped on the bus and went to the Conservancy's national meeting in Bloomington, Indiana. He got fired up by what he heard there, and he came back and talked to Joe Hickey and Hugh Iltis, and they sent out a flyer, an invitation to the members of the Wisconsin Academy of Sciences, Arts, and Letters to invite them to help save some of Wisconsin's landscape. And as they say, the rest is history. As a result of this letter going out to the Wisconsin Academy, 38 people showed up at the first meeting of the Nature Conservancy on May 6, 1960, 5 years ago almost to the date, and launched the Nature Conservancy in Wisconsin. Gene served on the Nature Conservancy's Board of Trustees for 24 years, from 1960 to 1984, and during most of those years, the Nature Conservancy was operated by volunteer leadership like Gene's. Gene served as the chair of the Conservancy's board from 1978 to 1981. And during those early years, Gene and his fellow trustees launched some of what would become the Nature Conservancy's highest priority projects in Wisconsin, places like the Baraboo Hills, the Door Peninsula, Chilwaukee Prairie, and northern Wisconsin. By the time Gene left the board in 1984, the Conservancy had an office in Madison with 4 paid staff, and the organization had recruited 5,200 members in the state and had protected over 17,000 acres of forests, prairies, and wetlands in 83 different spots across Wisconsin. Over the years since then, Gene has remained very active and engaged with the Nature Conservancy as an emeritus trustee and serving on our Baraboo Hills working group. He serves on our Conservation Policy Committee right now. He helps with fundraising, and he consistently advocates for good conservation policy and important funding. In his time with the Nature Conservancy, Gene has helped protect more than 230,000 acres of Wisconsin's most beautiful and diverse and ecologically important lands and waters. Some of these places are also near and dear to Gene's heart, including the Guido Rahr Sr. Tenderfoot Forest Reserve in Vilas County, shown here, where Gene spent many happy years tramping around as a young, footloose, and fancy-free boy. But not being content to protect bird habitat only in Wisconsin, Gene became a leader to also launch the Nature Conservancy's work in Nicaragua to protect rainforest habitat there. Gene served on the Nature Conservancy's Nicaragua Conservation Advisory Committee, and he traveled to Nicaragua twice in the 1990s with the Conservancy, sometimes under very challenging, very difficult conditions. He can tell you some stories over lunch. And he also helped spread the word back here at Wisconsin how important it is to protect habitat for our migrating birds and butterflies that we enjoy in the warmer months in their tropical habitats. In 1998, the Wisconsin chapter of the Nature Conservancy awarded Gene its highest honor, the Outstanding Achievement Award. But even as Gene dedicated so much of his time and life to the work of the Nature Conservancy, as you heard, he shared time and talents with many other organizations. We can't touch on all of them, but I'd like to share just a few of his other accomplishments. As I mentioned earlier, Gene is a bird lover, has been since he was a kid. He's a bird watcher. And he joined the Madison Audubon Society as a teenager in the 1940s. He wrote their newsletter for several years, and he served on their board, including the years the Society acquired Goose Pond, its first acquisition project in a very important place. In 2004, the Madison Audubon Society recognized Gene's contribution with its Environmentalist of the Year award. Gene joined the Dane County Conservation League in the 1950s and served as a board member, president, chairman of the Tree and Shrub Distribution Program, and he wrote the group's newsletter for that organization also for several years. In 1996, Gene received the league's Starkweather-Snyder Conservationist of the Year award. Gene has also served on the Wisconsin Wetland Association's board of directors since 2001 and as an emeritus board member since 2014. And so I asked Executive Director Tracy Hames for his thoughts about Gene, and Tracy's here with us today, but I'm going to speak on behalf of what Tracy had to say about Gene. Gene has the rare ability to know just who to bring together to address whatever issue is at hand. His extensive connections and respect throughout the conservation community make for effective partnership development. Vision, persistence, tireless service, and integrity are just a few of the words that come to my mind to describe Gene's service to Wisconsin's lands and waters. He is an inspiration to our staff and board, and we are beyond grateful for his long-standing commitment to our organization and to the conservation of Wisconsin's wetlands. Another important organization for which Gene has served as a leader is the Natural Heritage Land Trust. He served on the board from 1998 through 2005, and he was secretary for 2 years. This is a Dane County, Madison located group that does conservation work in multiple counties in central Wisconsin. Very important organization. And Jim Welsh is here with us today. In 2004, Gene and his wife Jean, along with his brother and sister, worked with the Natural Heritage Land Trust to place a conservation easement on land they own on Lake Wisconsin. Through their action, this easement protects the land and approximately 3,500 feet of shoreline on the lake from development forever. So I asked Jim Welsh, the executive director, for his thoughts about Gene, and here's what Jim told me. And Jim is here too, in the back right there. Jim says, I first met Gene in the early 1990s when I worked for the Nature Conservancy. Over the years, Gene has been one of my guiding lights. He helped me understand that one of the most critical elements for success in land conservation is how you treat landowners. So it was natural for Gene to lead our landowner outreach efforts in western Dane County in the landscape where Aldo Leopold's Riley Game Cooperative operated in the 1930s and 40s. This is a place where we are now working to protect this habitat. Gene also told me not to be timid when it comes to land conservation. When I was with the Nature Conservancy at a Baraboo Hills working group meeting in the late 1900s, after I presented what I thought was a huge land conservation strategy for the Nature Conservancy's work in the Baraboo Hills, Gene said something to the effect of, "That's pretty good, Jim, but you have to think big." So that is a good lesson, Jim says, and one I hope that I have learned from Gene. In Jim's comments, he mentioned the Riley Game Preserve in Dade County, and I want to say just a few words about Gene's connection to that land. When he was young, Gene's family lived in the Riley area and was friends with Aldo Leopold's family. Gene's dad was a professor at the university also, and he and Aldo Leopold were friends and were hunting companions. Gene tells a wonderful story about one day when he was a pretty young boy, he went out with his dad and Aldo Leopold to hunt pheasants. Gene was embarrassed. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn, let alone a pheasant that day. But Aldo Leopold has his own embarrassing story from that day, which Gene can also tell you about. So I bring this up because Gene has accomplished so much in his lifetime and his career, but he has unfinished business, and he is continuing to work doggedly on the Riley Game Preserve to make sure those lands are protected in perpetuity. People leave their mark on the world in many ways, and Gene Roark has made a difference for the forests, the lakes, the wetlands, the rivers and prairies of Wisconsin, as well as the rainforests of Nicaragua, and the many birds, plants, and other species that depend on these places to survive. Personally, Gene is an inspiration to me, and I know I can say that for my colleagues in the Nature Conservancy and for the board and the emeritus trustees of our organization. Gene is a trusted advisor. We listen to Gene, like Jim said, you listen to Gene and you apply those lessons, and we really treasure his perspective and his relationships in the conservation community. I am proud to know Gene, and even prouder to have worked with Gene for the past 27 years on Wisconsin conservation. So on behalf of all of us at the Nature Conservancy and the conservation community, Gene, we thank you for all you've done and all that you continue to do to protect the lands and waters of this state that we love. Thanks, Gene. And now I'll turn things over to Nancy Bozen.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Gene Roark on the occasion of his 2015 induction into the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame. Thank you to the Hall of Fame members and governors for recognizing Gene's decades of work with many nonprofit organizations and his legacy in the field of conservation. A special thank you goes to his wife, Jean, for sharing their story. Her words can be found throughout my presentation. Thank you also to Jean and their two sons, Mike and David, for supporting and sharing in Gene's passion for Wisconsin's landscape. The conservation community in Wisconsin is indebted to you for your unselfishness in allowing Gene the time to share his talents. We know that many conservationists have been influenced by those around them, and Gene is no exception. A lifelong Wisconsinite, Gene's passion for the environment started at a young age. He was born in 1931 to Professor and Mrs. Raymond Roark. Professor Roark, an assistant professor in mechanics and civil engineering at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, was also known as an outdoor man with a deep interest in the conservation of natural resources. His parents, especially his father, took Gene hiking, camping, canoeing, and hunting. His father shared his love of wildlife and nature in general with Gene and his sister Nancy and brother Bill. The family enjoyed many outdoor activities on their undeveloped acreage on Lake Wisconsin. At a young age, Gene learned to identify birds and joined the Madison Audubon Society and Bird Box. Mrs. R.A. Walker of the Madison chapter was instrumental in his developing an appreciation of birds and their identification. As we have heard, Gene also benefited from the family's friendship with the Aldo Leopold family. These experiences and many others helped him create an appreciation and love of the land. Aldo Leopold's philosophy of the land ethic has had a profound influence on Gene's ideas about the environment. Leopold's The Sand County Almanac was and continues to be an inspirational book for Gene. In 1953, Gene earned a bachelor degree of science in sociology, followed by service in the U.S. Army in the States and Germany. From 1957 to 59, he was a University of Wisconsin-Madison graduate student in the new program of conservation journalism under noted environmental educator Professor Clay Schoenfeld, Joint Professor of Journalism, Mass Communication, and Wildlife Ecology. As a graduate student, Gene and others joined efforts to save Bascom Woods from development. They were only partially successful as the new social science building was constructed. Much of Gene's professional career found him utilizing his journalistic training and his love of the outdoors. While in the Department of Natural Resources, he spent time in charge of press relations and later the tourism section. Years later, he became the chief of the Bureau of Vacation and Travel Services, now known as the Department of Tourism. Today, we honor him as a Wisconsin citizen who not only cares deeply about conservation, but took action daily to improve conservation efforts in the state of Wisconsin. I met Gene in 1995 when I came to work for the Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association. Even 20 years ago, I was impressed with his knowledge of and participation in citizen-led conservation efforts throughout Wisconsin. He seemed to know everyone, and they knew him. His ability to remember the history of conservation efforts in Wisconsin while incorporating Leopold's holistic philosophy of the land ethic and his willingness to share his vision with newly forming conservation organizations helped to grow some of Wisconsin's most well-known conservation associations. It is hard to believe that one man, even when retired, had time to accomplish so much. The 1980s and 1990s were a busy time for environmentalism in Wisconsin. New conservation organizations were being formed, and Gene was there to share his expertise and talents by serving on boards of directors, creating and writing newsletters, leading legislative efforts, and encouraging these organizations to work together. I offer Gene's work with the Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association, or WOA, as an example of his service to Wisconsin's conservation efforts. Gene joined WOA in 1979 as it was forming. Gene shared his journalism background with WOA from the beginning. Our newsletter committee started in 1980. Over time, the sheets of paper became a newsletter, and then a quarterly 44-page magazine titled Wisconsin Woodlands. Through all of these changes, Gene served on our publication committee, attending meetings, providing advice on magazine content, offering to write pieces, and making suggestions for future topics and authors for issues. Encouraging the committee to expand its coverage beyond woodland management to reflect nature's diversity within our woodlands is just one of his legacies. For 34 years, he helped create and guide our award-winning publication, making him the longest-serving publications committee member. In 1995, Gene was elected to WOA's board of directors. In the early years, he once asked me if WOA was ready for someone like him. While he might not have thought we were at the time, I hope he realizes that he has been instrumental in helping us develop a vision wider than just the trees. As WOA grew, Gene often volunteered to represent private woodland owner interests at many organizational meetings he attended. He retired from WOA's board of directors 18 years later in 2013 as our longest-serving board member. From 1996 to 2012, Gene chaired our Government Affairs Committee. Under his leadership, we worked to increase WOA members' awareness of legislative issues by coordinating efforts with our publication committee. Gene frequently met with and befriended DNR secretaries and chief state foresters, in addition to other state government employees at all levels. Gene always had time to discuss any issues that impacted woodland owners or our natural resources. Through Gene's work, WOA had an opportunity to have a voice in a variety of woodland issues. DNR issues such as the creation of the Wisconsin Forest Landowner Grant Program, DNR's forestry account spending, declining DNR forestry technical assistance provided to private woodland owners, and revisions to the managed forest law too numerous to count were some of the items he tackled. Gene was also well known in the halls of the Capitol, taking time to establish relationships with legislators and their aides. He worked to educate legislators on the impacts of their bills on private landowners. Bills covering a variety of topics, including DNR reorganization, the right to practice forestry, timber theft, use value assessment, fencing laws, and the impacts of the deer herd on the woodlands were discussed. While the world moved into the personal computer age and correspondence came to the WOA office via email, Gene continued to communicate his thoughts, sometimes lengthy, by longhand on yellow-lined notepad paper. As the recipient of many of these letters to be typed and sent out on WOA's behalf, I was always impressed that Gene could clearly communicate and express his thoughts without error. His service in the government affairs arena was extensive, so I will just mention a few examples. Governor's Council on Invasive Species Regulatory Committee, Wisconsin Council on Forestry Advisory Committee on Forest Invasives, Wisconsin Legislative Study Committee on a review of the Managed Forest Law Program, Governor's Task Force on Global Warming, Forestry and Agricultural Work Group, and the Wisconsin Forest Sustainability Framework Advisory Committee. In his free time, he also participated in two of WOA's local chapters, the Bad Axe and the Black Hawk. He served as the Bad Axe chapter's secretary-treasurer for at least 3 years and edited the chapter newsletter. Did I mention that Gene not only talks the talk, but he walks the walk on his own land? In addition to his work with numerous conservation organizations, he has been a good steward of the land he owns. Gene describes his philosophy of woodland management by explaining that he is a tree hugger with chainsaw in hand. Mary Jean already mentioned the land on Lake Wisconsin. Gene and his wife planted hundreds of white pine and white cedar along with native shrubs for wildlife to improve this degraded woods and farmland. In 1973, Gene and his wife purchased 120 acres of old farmland and woods in northern Richland County. Their objective for the property has evolved from leave it alone to increasing diversity. Thousands of trees, including red oak, black walnut, and white pine, have been planted by the family. 4 timber sales have taken place, yet many of the largest and most valuable trees remain. Regular deer hunting by family and friends has helped keep the deer population in check, and hundreds of tree shelters have been used to protect seedlings and other plants from the deer. Prairie grasses and native forbs have been planted in several open areas to recreate pre-settlement plant communities. This secluded land of hills, streams, rock outcroppings, woods, fields, wildflower, and wildlife is a great source of enjoyment for the Roark family. In 1998, Richland County Land Conservation Commission presented them with the Forestry Improvement Award. Gene's unending dedication to a variety of conservation organizations has not gone unnoticed, and Mary Jean mentioned a few of the awards that he has received. I have a few more. In 2003, Gene was presented with the Wisconsin Woodland Owners Association's Distinguished Service Award. In 2008, he was awarded the Invader Crusader Award from the Invasive Plants Association of Wisconsin and Friend of Forestry from DNR Division of Forestry. Frequently we miss when history is being made because we only see our own small world. It is only over time, through the lens of the future, looking back, that key turning points are often noted for all time. However, today, the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame confirms with their decision to induct Gene Roark what I and many others have witnessed and admired over many, many years. Gene possesses an environmental ethic and conservation wisdom beyond his years. While Leopold's land ethic has inspired Gene, it is Gene who has inspired a whole new generation of conservationists. Thank you, Gene.
I'd like to thank Mary Jean and Nancy for their great comments about Gene and his wonderful work that he has focused on for so many years. As I indicated earlier, we also recognize and appreciate all the work he's done with the Conservation Hall of Fame by serving as president and on the board of directors. It is at this time that we would do the unveiling of the plaque, and then we'll ask Gene to say a few words. Gene will bring the microphone down to you if you want to swing around and address the audience. And Eric, up in the sound studio, could you make sure that this new mic is going to work? Testing, testing. Eric, are you there? Is this working? Yes. Okay. Gene, on behalf of the Wisconsin Conservation Hall of Fame, you see that your name and your image will be in the Hall of Fame, and we're going to keep the plaque, so we're giving you a replica of that. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you, Nancy and Mary Jean. Hard to recognize myself in all of that. But I have to say it's extremely gratifying to be here today and see so many people I know and worked with to one degree or another. And I've enjoyed every minute of it. quit, although I obviously slowed down somewhat, and expect that'll continue. Trying to sort of focus on a lesson that maybe all of us should take away from today. We've seen what's important in the way of citizen action. And, you know, it's awfully easy to join an organization and go to the meetings, read the newsletter, and go on some field trips and all of those things, but we need more than that. We need people to really get involved. And those who are actively involved in environmental, natural resource protection, management, I think of George Meyer there, who spent a lifetime. And he not only lives the message, he carries it out in his daily work. He could easily have retired from his state job and gone and spent the rest of the time fishing and hunting, but he got himself a job with the Wildlife Federation, and he's busier than ever. And there are other people here in the room who could kind of sit back and relax and say, well, I've done my duty, done my stint, but let's not quit. There's lots of things going on in Madison right now, and certainly in Washington, that really demand our attention. And it won't happen unless we buckle down and do it. So I hope that the conversation you heard today will maybe inspire all of us to keep at it, stick with it. And we all know somebody who has influence in the legislature, and we should use our influence to influence them to do the right thing. Believe me, there are plenty of people working on the other side of these issues, and they'll win if we don't become more active, more involved. We can do it as members of organizations, as I've tried to do, or we can do it as individuals, or we can do both. And I hope we will. I am joining some wonderful company. As it was pointed out, I was fortunate enough to actually know personally Aldo Leopold and actually hunt with him. There's a reference made to my one real hunting experience with Aldo Leopold when I was about 13. I had a single shot Stevens shotgun, 20-gauge shotgun, and with a shooting preserve so we could shoot hens. And I shot at a bunch of hens and missed them all. And Aldo Leopold said to me, sort of, what's the expression, sotto voce, very quietly, he said, Gene, the reason you're missing is that you're shooting from the hip. Well, of course, I was at that age where I was very sensitive to criticism from my elders, and I remember feeling shamed by this august gentleman who was a good friend of my father's, but kind of hard for a kid to get to know. And the rest of the morning I suffered in silence. But then a little while later, his favorite dog, who was a German short-haired pointer, locked onto a little clump of cover. And we all thought, well, there'll be a big rooster pheasant come bolting out of that clump of whatever it was, sedges or something. Because the dog was on this beautiful point. All of a sudden, the big yellow cat bolted out of this cover and ran off. We didn't shoot it. Should have done. There was no pheasant. And I kind of felt like I'd gotten I don't know. I don't know who looked more embarrassed, the dog or all of them. But the rest of the day was uneventful. And it was the only opportunity I had to hunt with Leopold. I did have other contacts with him because he was a very close friend of my father's, and Mrs. Leopold was a close friend of my mother's. And I even got to sleep in the shack one time. So I've been influenced by some wonderful people. People like Bill Shorter and Joe Haiti and others that I've known, and some I've known only by reputation. But Clay Shainfeld was mentioned in connection with my graduate work in journalism. And I got to know Gordon McQuarrie, and I got to know Jay Reed, and I got to know a lot of outdoor writers, people who were out in the trenches in one way or another, working on natural resource issues. So I was privileged and I was fortunate. Not to my credit, most of these things, they just happened in the course of events. But when I look around this room today, I see an awful lot of people I know, and very few that I don't know in some context. And that's one of the great benefits of being involved in natural resource issues and conservation organizations. And I'm not going to say a great deal more because I know it's getting late and we still have business to attend to. So thank you for coming. Appreciate your attendance today, and we'll see who we get nominated next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gene, for those kind words and inspiring words. Switch back to the other mic. Thank you.